I'm here today to show you how to paint an Aurora Borealis. I'm using a Hahnemühle watercolor block, cold pressed 300 GM, which is 140 pounds. They now have it in 9 by 12 inches rather than the 9.4, 12.6 inch European size. So if you're in the US, this size would be easier to frame, and it's also like if you have a scanner, it fits on your scanner better. I'm very happy that they have this now. I am going to be using this Da Vinci artist color set. This is their new Joyce signature palette. Beautiful colors. I love these mother violet, mother green granulating colors. But you can see the different colors I'm using here. I will mostly be using these bright colors. I'm going to be using this Princeton soft quill Neptune. It's a number 4 size. The main thing is that you have a nice soft brush when we're adding the water and the initial background colors. And then when I'm doing the trees, I'm going to be using this Arteza Premium size 6 flat. And that's this, what you need is this squared off edge. Before we even start, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to add a little bit of water to my paints. And this is to get them nice and softened up. Do the bright colors. Okay. And I might decide to do some Prussian blue. We'll see about that. So into this is a spray bottle that I use. You can use the handle to pump. It holds quite a bit of water, of course. If you have the battery in it, it's also a fan. I doubt if you can see that fan moving, but it gives you the choice of, rather than like using a heated dryer that might dull the color, if you want to dry your paints faster or move them, then that fan comes in handy. But any spray bottle will do, because in essence I'm using that to get the paper really wet. Normally you wouldn't need to do this, but I intend to use lots and lots of water and runny paints, so there is this chance that some paint could seep in there. It's not real likely, but I have had it happen. So just as an extra precaution, I'm going to tape this off. The first thing I'm going to do here is I have this spray bottle. It allows me to spray, and also has a fan so I can kind of move the water around if I want to. Water, and hopefully getting lots of movement. And I want water standing in puddles. Now after you've sprayed quite a bit, you'll kind of want to start looking at the light there. You can see where there at the bottom there really isn't very much water. Not only does that make your paper puff up, when you add color, the color will just go right around the places that aren't wet. So you want to make sure that you get every last little bit wet. I'm going to add some Vermilion. You don't have to use, in fact, every time that you do this kind of a thing, you're going to get a different look. It's just never going to be the same. Go ahead and mix some up there. So I recommend trying all sorts of different colors and seeing what you like. Now see, now part of this is how this Hansa yellow is just not as reactive to water as this manganese hue is, and the Vermilion was kind of in between the two. Now, color theory is you tend to get more neutral colors, and sometimes you can even get mud if you mix the three primaries, red, blue, and yellow. So you can mix this manganese with the yellow, and you can mix it with the red, but you don't want to have a place, or at least not too much, where it would mix with all three. So I'll get that in there. And I did that. You can see here where you've got the influence of all three colors. It's a little bit more of a gray. Still actually a very nice color, but I'm going more for bright at the moment. Add a different yellow. You also should avoid mixing orange and blue, or yellow and purple, or red and green, because you will get neutrals, and that's not always. Sometimes you'll want those neutrals. So this is a situation where think about what you want. I want some nice bright colors. So I'm trying to keep it that way. That cobalt blue is really reactive. That's nice. I like that. This, I use the Hahnemühle paper. This is kind of my go-to Hahnemühle Collection hot press, because I like the way it handles the color. Cooler color in here now. Let's go ahead and get some down here. And this is the permanent rose. Cooler, if you're not familiar with those terms. I think I'm going to throw some more yellow into this. Get down here where it's going to be more of a green. Put some more of that cool. I'm going to kind of run this cooler color here more kind of along the edges. Now I'm going to go ahead and chance it a little bit because I want to get some more flow here. I don't want it to be so much up and down, so I'm going to make it swirl a little bit. And I'm going to do that by spraying it. Even before I do that though, since I've got this lying at a tilt, you can see how the color is all coming down here. And I'm just going to take a Kleenex and hold it to the corner and let it soak up a little bit just around the edges. And if I forget to tell you later, I'll mention right now too that when we're done with this, before I take this off, or after I take it off, I'm going to take a damp towel and clean off the taped edges just so I don't bring some color onto my next page. Accidentally pick it up. Okay, so spray. And then I'm going to tilt it. And I'm going to get my fan. This also makes it dry a little faster. If you force the drying, I think the colors come out a little more dull. tilt it around. And you see here where I deliberately put it where you'd have all the colors together, how dark it is. And I won't call that mud. I don't think it's mud, but it's definitely more of a neutral. And it doesn't hurt to have a little bit of neutral. My thing that I'm going for is some nice bright colors, but that neutral and a little bit darker and the change in the temperatures give you some contrast. Okay, can you see what's happening over here in this, where I'm tilting it? I'm getting some nice effects there. I like the manganese and cobalt, so I'm gonna pick up some more of the cobalt, or excuse me, more of the manganese, and add it here into this. I'm just kind of tapping the brush. What I'd kind of like to try doing here now is giving a little bit more of a textured effect. I will be adding some silhouetted trees down here, so it doesn't matter quite as much. I'm just taking some of this paint that wants to pool. Yeah, it'll come out neutral, but that'll be okay. Show some of the color, and bring back our spray. You might not need to do this last spray. It depends on whether you're happy with all the color you have. And once I've got this nice and wet again, I'm just going to tilt it around and let that color move. Down here at the bottom, I don't mind if the colors are neutral because this is at the ground level, and so it won't disturb all the bright lights up there in the sky. To finish off, I'm going to let the water drip off, and then I'm going to use a Kleenex and pick up some of the paint that's pooled down at the very edge. Then I'll let it sit for 2 or 3 hours to dry thoroughly. One way to check, make sure that your paper is completely dry, is to put your back of the nails to it, and if it feels cool, then it's not dry. Mind you, this is assuming that it's not the dead of winter and you have no heat. While the background is drying, I'm going to show you some techniques for painting trees. I'm using a flat brush. Now watch the handle of the brush. Notice for this, I'm holding it straight. For the first one, I just pull down. The second, I kind of tap, which gives you more of a broken line. You can go either way. Just depends on what you want. Now, to create the branches, again, watch the handle as I'm doing this. Sometimes it's straight up and down. Now I'm using the corner, just applying a little bit of pressure, pulling it straight out. And I'll repeat this. Most trees have branches that they all go down or they all go up. And sometimes they just kind of go out straight. I'm not paying attention to that obviously here. This is the kind of a scraggly little tree. To get fuller branches, you'll note that I'm using the corner again, but I'm going to be applying a little bit more pressure and using a little bit more of the brush rather than just the corner and just the edge. I'm flexing a little bit and getting more of those bristles into it. And I really recommend practicing this. It's not difficult, but then the experienced person always says this is easy, and then somebody who's never done it is going, oh, I don't know how to do it, I can't. You just have to practice and it will come. Just watch how you're slanting the brush straight up, straight down. What are the effects that you get? And then you use the corner. When you use the corner, you get a different look than when you're using the entire flat of the brush. When you use it straight up and down, when you tap, try doing all these things. I have one teacher who called this using the dancing brush, and that's, you want to keep it dancing. You don't have to move as fast as I am. In the beginning, you probably won't. Now I added a little bit more behind to thicken up the tree a little bit, or you could take that as the a tree behind this particular tree. These are silhouettes, so you don't have to be real detailed. In fact, you don't want too much detail. Now, I'm going to do a whole stand of a whole stand of trees. And mainly I put in these trunks first to give me an idea of, you know, how far down. I want some trees to be a little further down than others. The trees that are closer should be darker than the trees further back. Or if you're doing a bunch like this, they can be the same value, but you don't want a tree that's further back to be a whole lot darker than the trees in front of it, because that just confuses the brain. You don't see that. And I'm not being as careful with my branches. I'm really just making that brush dance. I'm making the branches towards the top shorter than the ones at the bottom. That's fairly natural if you look at trees. And I'm leaving a little bit of that trunk showing at the top, that pointed edge. And mind you, when you first draw those trunks, that's a guide. If you change your mind and decide that you want to have them further apart, closer together, don't let that first bit dictate what you're going to do. You see I've got little white spots in there. Those just kind of happen naturally as I'm pouncing the brush around, and I'm going to leave those because it's nice to have some color coming through. Don't try and plan those. It never looks natural if you try and leave a little spot here, a little spot there. But if you're not seeing that you're getting some spots, then that means you need to kind of loosen up a little bit. Now I've mixed up a large batch of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to create a black color. Now I'm going to mix a little bit of that with the manganese blue. And what I'm doing here is a background set of trees. That's straight up and down to do the trunks. This kind of just shows me where I'm going to place my trees. And now I'm kind of slanting just a little bit using, it's still the edge, but it's along the side. It's not straight up and down. And I'm doing these fairly high because they're going to be background. I'm going to be painting darker trees in front of them. Most of what I'm painting here is going to get hidden, but I'm doing the whole tree anyway because I want to make sure that if I have any gaps in between on my front row of trees, that these will show through. And I'm being even less careful with these than I would be with the first set, because like I say, they're mostly going to be hidden, and yeah, that one's going to be darker. Doesn't matter if some of them are a little darker, because that will just give the feeling that they're closer because you have darker values. But I will put a darker one in here. That Got a little bit too much black on that one, but that's okay. It really doesn't matter. I'm starting to run out of paint here, and I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to make it kind of a V shape here a little bit, just roughly. Give the indication. The lighter the trees are, the further they'll seem away, farther away they'll seem. Okay, I've got that pretty well dry. So now I'm going to be taking the black that I mixed, and I'm going to coat my brush pretty well. I'll still probably have to keep reaching down and getting some more, but I want this to be the highest point right here. Shorter tree. I'm going to go for a little bit of symmetry in that I'm going to start them around the same place. Let's get a higher one here. Now this one is higher than this one, which would indicate it's further away, so it has to be an equal value or lighter, because if I make this darker and it shows that it's further away, it's going to look unnatural. Let's get a little more paint. And I'm using the corner, really not applying a whole lot of pressure. Got my branches going down. If a gap occurs, I just let it go, because it shows that nice background, and again it looks more natural. When I get a little further down, I'll make sure that I coat a little heavier. My branches are going to be thicker, and because the light would not get down as far, I want to make sure that the bottom of my trees is darker, or at least as dark as the top. I don't want them to get lighter. Okay, down here there's not too much detail. I'm just going to run my trees into each other. This is silhouette. It's really dark because all that light up in the sky. So you don't have to worry about a lot of detail. Just make sure you've got some edges. Get this part here, as far as detail, is always going to be more important. Okay, now you can see I'm really just not putting a lot of effort into making any great detail at all. Not keeping my brush damp enough. Now I'm going to make a tree here. I'm going to have a little bit of a separation. I'm going to make him lower. This one I'm going to have kind of standing alone. So I'm going to put a little more effort into this detail. And again, I'm using the corner of my brush, giving a little bit more detail to these branches. Need a little bit more of a scrawny tree, but I want to make sure it's darker at the bottom. I'm gonna go ahead and just let that kind of wispy look there stand. Okay. My paint is, well, no, I had more paint on there than I thought, but we'll put a tree in behind there. Now I'm painting around the camera here, so it's a little harder for me to do these trees over here. They may get a little sloppy, but sloppy is kind of my thing. This is one of painting trees like this is really easy. And you're going to say, no, it's not if you haven't been doing this. It's a matter of practice. You just, practically they paint themselves once you get used to doing it. Now notice that I'm taking some care to make sure that I don't have these just like going in a line. I'm going to bring this one down a little bit more just because I want to make sure of that fact that they're not, I don't want my tops to be in a line, I don't want my bottoms to be in a line. I'm going to blur this a little bit later so it won't matter as much, but it's still, if you put it in a line, the only time you see trees in a real straight line is if somebody's planted them. So unless that's the feeling you want to give, is that these are planted trees, you do not want them to be in a straight line. These guys are further. Bring them down. And now I'm kind of looking at this. In nature, of course, doesn't care whether there's a balance or not, but I want to have something like a balance. Okay, I've got this guy down further. I think I'll bring this one here down just a little bit further. That just helps give a little more balance. Again, I'll be adding some more color down in here so it won't matter quite as much. Okay, again, I'm going to let them dry. Won't necessarily let them, nothing like letting the background dry, but just enough so that I'll be dragging some of this black down, and I don't want to get a whole lot of it, and if I do it while it's wet, I'll get too much. I also want to let these dry, and then I may apply some more if it looks like my values are not correct. Because this was the first one, it's drying and you can see that it's already lighter than some of these others, but they're wet, so you need to let it dry. That's the only way you can really tell for sure what your values are. Now that our trees are fairly dry, we're going to take the flat brush again. Not going to use any paint, we're just going to get this wet. You don't want it dripping, but a little bit more than damp. Then you reach the brush into the color and just start pulling some of it down. Light pressure, don't do it too heavy. You want to try and avoid getting a white line because you're picking up too much color. And just kind of keep moving that down. Don't cover it entirely. Don't try and follow the shapes of the branches. Just have it branch out and roughly be the same shape as the tree, but nothing too detailed. And you'll see it's a little, you're seeing kind of a black line at the base of that tree. That's actually caused because it's wet. Don't fuss with that, let it dry, and then decide whether it needs any adjustment. As with most values, you'll want the shadows to be a little darker the closer the tree. These distant trees, you want to show that there is some shadow, but it's going to be very, very faint. For this tree that's a little bit behind, I'm going to take the shadow and just run it right into the tree and a little past that tree that's in front of it. And I'm kind of following the light as though it were up in the upper left, but I'm not being real exact. With an Aurora Borealis, you've got light flickering and going all different directions, so you're not as tied to a single light source. And I think if you try and make too exact with your light and shadows, it isn't going to look right. So just sort of, I wouldn't put them like straight towards the bottom of the paper from the trees, but don't worry about getting your slants just right. I'm doing a little bit of adjusting on that tree. It had dried enough I could see where it was going. This section in here, I like the color showing through, but it was a little too bright and just drew the eye. In fact, it had become the focus of the painting. I want those lights up above to be the focus. So don't let any place get too bright down here among the trees. And again, I'm making shadows from the other trees kind of run into the trees in front. And I went ahead and pulled more to the left of the paper. More as a matter of balance of the painting than keeping it so that it was exactly right for the actual lighting. Now I'm going to let this dry. Just the black is a little dull. So I'm picking up a fairly thick mix of the manganese blue hue. You have to remember that color shift always occurs, especially with a lighter color over a darker, where it looks nice and bright, but it will dry lighter. So make it brighter than you think it really needs to be. I'll help to adjust the values with this blue, and also just add a little bit of interest and imply some reflected light from all those beautiful Aurora Borealis flickerings that are going on. This tree in particular is a little too dark for its placement, and I'm going to go ahead and put this manganese blue hue on and let it dry to see how it looks after it's finished. And then I'll probably need to do a little bit more adjusting so that it isn't quite so bright, but we'll see. It always pays to wait till things are dry. I keep telling myself that, but I don't always remember it. The painting is pretty much finished at this point. It's just a matter of looking for those values. Does something come forward that you don't think should come forward? Is something really bright catching your eye or too dark catching your eye? Then you might make adjustments. Look at it, let it set for a few minutes, look at it again, let it set for a few minutes. Sometimes I'll even do this throughout the course of a day, is just kind of look at it and see if there's something that's catching my eye. I try not to fuss too much, but I do look for those things that you know, like if, say, where I had that bright spot earlier, something like that's popping out, then I will darken a little, or I might want to lift a little color. It's just all in what you want and how you want this to appear to other people. They won't see exactly what you do, but as the artist, you can only deal with what you can see. I hope you've enjoyed painting an Aurora Borealis with me. There is a written version of this tutorial at doodlewash.com.